Chapter 8. Even with all our technology and the inventions that make modern life so much easier than it once was, it takes just one big natural disaster to wipe all that away and remind us that here on Earth, we're still at the mercy of nature. Neil deGrasse Tyson. It was midnight. Pouring rain pounded the roof of Joe's house, making sleep difficult. He had a troubled spirit after spending the afternoon lecturing his oldest son. "You are setting a bad example for your brothers and sisters. I know you think life is just one big party, but I don't want to be a grandfather yet. Do you want the other guys to follow your example and treat your sisters like sluts? Don't turn your back on me. Come back here." Looking over his shoulder, Christopher shouted, "Do you really think I'm that evil? Have you forgotten I go to church with you every Sunday? I may not be a saint, but I'm not the devil." Joe wondered why their conversation had blackened so quickly. All he was trying to do was protect Christopher from making a life-altering mistake. Where had such thoughts come from? Perhaps because the alienation had developed slowly, he never saw the crisis coming. Strife had found it so easy to plant thoughts in Joe's mind. Years ago, he thought before he spoke, but with continual years of demonic harassment and bad habits, he now spewed out whatever thought popped into his mind. His ears were still ringing from the conversation. His mind kept playing it over and over, until every bitter comment poisoned his heart. From their hiding place across the room, Joe's hideous opponents were whispering vile words into the air. "Good. He seems very disturbed by all this. We have him right where we want him for tonight's attack," Satan quipped. Joe worried that his children were getting themselves into unpardonable trouble. Eyes began to glow in the steadily thickening celestial darkness. Satan's taloned fingers continued to tap his knees, his brow furrowing with an obsessive scowl. Behind him, a host of demons were positioned, spellbound with anticipation, waiting for Satan's orders. Sleep eventually did come, but it was accompanied by dour dreams relayed to him by Forebodin. Joe was outside in a storm, the wind blowing all about him. He stood at the end of the pier, trying to understand the quickly moving shapes he could only dimly see in the darkness of the crashing waves. At first, there was nothing but sets of red, piercing eyes, and then the moon suddenly broke through the clouds. Joe could see everything. Chaotic and frantic images rushed at him. He could hear screams. There was a sensation of death and the sight and taste of blood. Stumbling, he heard a distant voice. "Pop? Where are you? I can't see you. I'm lost. Christopher, I've been searching for you." The voice receded as he ran towards it. "Where are you?" "Over here. This way." The sound whirled round and round him, the voices multiplying, echoing, confusing, and frightening him more. He screamed for Christopher. Joe broke into a run, but found himself moving in a frustratingly slow motion. Joe fought and struggled for his life. Insurmountable fear and danger surrounded him. He tried to call for help, to tell the creatures that were now coming at him to stop, but his voice was stolen by fear, and he could make no sound. He waved his arms, hoping to catch someone's attention. Something flashed in his hand. Joe cringed as he saw the gun. There, lying dead in front of him, was a dark demon with her bright red beaming eyes staring right at him. She had wild grayish-blue hair and was wearing a long sheer gown. Black twisted marks tattooed her face. Joe's eyes snapped open to the silent darkness of his room. He did not feel like he was alone. He looked all about the room and saw nothing, but the hair on his arms warned him. Something was not right. Satan sat and waited as his own breathing began to deepen. It rushed out of his nostrils like a rancid red steam. His eyes narrowed and his talons uncurled. Time stood still. Laying there in a state of stupor, halfway between sleep and consciousness, he suddenly noticed his heavy breathing. His pulse began to pound in his ears. The horrible fear racing through his mind was so real. Fear seemed so close that he could almost smell it. Hovering over him midair was the hideous face of Strife, who spewed out vicious words of terror and mayhem. Planting these thoughts in Joe's mind was an easy task, now that the angels of God were at bay. Joe lay there, drenched in sweat, waiting for his heart to calm down, for the stark fear to go away. But nothing seemed to change, and he couldn't make it go away. He kept telling himself it was only a nightmare. Looking around the room, he saw nothing out of the ordinary, but he could still feel an evil presence. Even the now silent room seemed sinister. Darkness deepened over Manhattan Beach. The messenger departed, a filthy black nightmare of a creature, borne on scabby wings. He departed to take word to the others that it was time for the attack. "Go!" he shouted, and hundreds of demons shot into the sky like a thunderous flock of bats, rushing along a straight and level route eastward to Christopher's house. "Look!" said an angelic warrior. Michael and his host saw a black swarm silhouetted against the night sky. Frustrated by their lack of power, they watched as the squadron approached Christopher's house. Joel was then assigned to get a closer look, but was cautioned that no help should be offered. Ignoring Joe's warning, Christopher had decided to have a party like no other. Joe had threatened that if anything happened to Jenny and Sarah, he would be disinherited. The tension had become so intense that Joe refused to attend the party. "Your mother and I will sit this one out. We can celebrate Jennifer and Sarah's birthday at lunch tomorrow after church. Well, at least I hope we can, if all of you aren't too hungover." "What's wrong with my old man anyway? Does he really think it would work saying, 'because he said so'? I'm not a kid anymore. 'Because I said so' only makes me want to do it more. Why is he such a jerk? Has he forgotten what it's like to be young?" Grumbling to himself, he began to marinate the meat. He could still hear his father preaching at him. "I wish you didn't hang out with Dan. I don't like the way he looks at your sisters. Yeah, a lot of people don't like Dan for that reason. But doesn't he realize Dan knows better than go after my sisters? I wish he had a little more faith in me. Sarah and Jenny would be furious if they knew he had threatened to ground them their entire senior year if they came to my party. Stop being a jerk, Dad." Awakened by a nightmare, Joe paced the house waiting. Anger churned inside him. Over the last year, their partying had escalated in frivolity, or at least in his mind it had. The house was jam-packed with young men. Having ignored their father's advice, Jenny and Sarah were out dancing when the first song played. Their favorite songs were being played by a DJ in the corner. A girl was dancing erotically in the middle of the crowd. An ugly little imp, with piercing, needle-sharp words, called seductive thoughts into the dancers' minds. Feeling the power of his intoxicating words, one girl slowly began to remove her clothes while dancing in a most suggestive way. Men began to sweat, beer flowed, blackness, like blindness, seemed to invade the heart of each partygoer. The demons arrived in arrogant brashness, descending on the party in the dead of night to ravage them all. Their ghastly red eyes full of lust circled the room, planting immoral thoughts. The two most evil ones slipped through the front doors and into the living room. People passed on all sides of them, and sometimes right through them. But that, of course, was of no consequence. Within moments, an evil wind blew through the room, hot, repulsive, and oppressive. At least 100 demons swooped like deadly bats, playing havoc with their bodies and minds. They screamed dirty sexual thoughts and wickedness, playing with the partygoers' corruptible souls. There could be no doubt that Satan had sent Lucifer to direct them. Around 2 p.m., the party began to die down as the last partygoer left. William and Luke had passed out in the upstairs bedroom, and Jennifer and Sarah were asleep on the couch. Jennifer and Sarah knew Damien from school. He had been expelled right before spring break. Riggins, Damien's only friend, left school shortly after the incident to be homeschooled. As with their rebellion against their parents, their treacherous world was filled with ceremonial violence. They had been seduced into following the precepts of a newly formed satanic cult. All they had to do was perform one ritualistic killing. To prepare for the murder, they had practiced, killing and mutilating a dog and a cat. Originally, they had planned to kill only one girl, but they hoped that killing twins would elevate them to a higher position. The satanic cult had offered them unlimited sex and drugs along with the ability to possess power over others. Heavy metal music and the use of illegal hallucinogenic drugs heightened the experience. They had been inspired to follow the precepts of Anton LaVey's Satanic Bible. Sarah and Jennifer had been randomly selected as targets because they were identical twins. Damien plotted their murders for more than a week. Obsessed with being accepted by the cult, he spent hours playing with demonic powers and taking drugs. Anticipating the big event, Damien and Riggins exchanged emails. Damien's first message to Riggins read, "I feel electrified. Can't wait to get started. Meet me at Hennessy's Tavern at midnight." That night, the police of Manhattan Beach were overly busy. Satan was making sure that no one would interfere with his plans. Fights broke out at the bar on the pier. Slogans were spray-painted on the city hall, and some cars were stolen and driven on a joyride through Pollywog Park. A huge, coal-black, malicious creature, Assassin's crimson eyes eerily glowed as he assessed his prey. When provoked, his eyes flickered from burgundy to jade. The harbinger of death, he brought calamity or death to those who were unfortunate enough to meet him. He prefers to hunt alone, cunningly planning to deliver as many souls as possible to his dark master. Although he never actually harmed anyone, eyewitnesses are never the same after they encounter him. His presence sends a terrifying chill through the bodies of those who hear him. He usually disappears completely after an encounter and lives in an abandoned graveyard until his master beckons him once more. Assassin was hand-picked to coordinate the attack. With him were Massacre and Slaughter, two of the most destructive demons in Satan's forces. Their targets were two young men whose minds were easily manipulated. "I hate them and their mocking looks. The Moretti girls are such bitches. I won't fail you, Master. I should really kill all of them. Their whole family deserves to die. None of them have treated me right." Damien grabs his claymore. He feels a yearning, a terribly strong impulse to finish them all off. He sees every detail of their death. "Kill them. Kill them. Kill them. The Master will be pleased. He will reward you." Flattered by the demon's approval, his answer was automatic. "I won't fail you." Damien and Riggins arrived at Hennessy's at the same time. They were seated at a table, served water, and a bowl of popcorn. Riggins grabbed a handful and popped it into his mouth. He ate another and then another before he noticed that Damien hadn't eaten a single kernel. He raised his eyes to him and stopped chewing. His mouth was full. Damien apparently read the question in his eyes. "I won't eat before a job. I want to be at the top of my game." Riggins swallowed and nodded. "Oh." A moment of silence passed before the waitress came back to the table to take their order. The bar food at Hennessy's wasn't bad, especially when washed down with a pint. Damien was pleased at how easily the waitress had accepted his fake ID. But most important to Damien was the fact that he was sitting there with Riggins finalizing their plans. It was a strange place for the two of them to meet, one that had a traditional, cozy feel indigenous to an Irish pub. Their table afforded them a view of the ocean. There were Bud and Guinness on draft, and the world's largest pint served in a gigantic 50-ounce souvenir glass filled with premium draft. Other options were harp if you were a female, or a pansy in Riggins's opinion. The crowded display of liquor behind the bar was laced heavily with whiskeys. Downing several drinks and a few pills, they finally decided it was time to give the twins a visit. Rumor had it that their older brother was having the party of parties that evening, to which, due to their outcast status, they had not been invited. The bar would be closing in 5 minutes, so they headed to Damien's house to get their weapons. As they walked up the walk street, they spotted Christopher Moretti sleeping on a couch on the porch. With a baseball bat he found in the yard, Damien bludgeoned Christopher to death. The thrill of the kill exponentially increased the taunts of the demons. "Kill them all! Kill them all! History will record this. I'm the new master. I will make Riggins second in command when we return from our victory. I am superior to them. So superior, it amazes me. The people around me are just so unbelievably gullible and stupid. It is so much fun to mess with them." They bound the Moretti family at gunpoint and locked them in respective bedrooms throughout the house. These practitioners of Satan became extremely cruel and vicious, temporarily losing control. Their behavior became emotionally charged, with little or no thought to the consequence of their acts. Substance abuse added to the mix of this improvised ritual. The pulsating music they played, coupled with the euphoric excitement of primal lust, caused these frenzied pseudo-Satanists to indulge in behavior closely resembling madmen. Their prey, the Moretti children, were hapless victims of a bloodthirsty ritual. They suffered pain, as helpless as sacrificial lambs. With his rough hand, he grabbed a fistful of Sarah's hair. With a violent, sideways jerk, he tore her clothes. Throwing her to the floor, her body was reeling. He stared at her with a blurred, hate-filled face. She whimpered, laying limp on the floor. A black boot blotted out her vision, driven into her face as her skull thudded on the floor. She went numb. Her body was twitching, and she kept hitting them. Both men took turns sexually assaulting her. Jennifer was next. The force of the first blow knocked her out of the chair, but she held on to Riggins' leg firmly. Her head sank, and she began to cry in very short, shallow gasps of terror. Riggins, like a possessed man, stood above her and boasted over her limp and trembling body. "What you don't realize is we're actually doing you a favor. Perhaps in your next life, you will remember to treat others better and have more fun." Then he grabbed her wrists and held them behind her body. She heard a click and felt the cold steel of the handcuffs. Sarah heard her ear-piercing scream. All the while, they filmed their adventure. There was blood upon the floor, and broken glass was scattered about the hardwood floor. The demons moved very little, mumbling back and forth in different languages, their sulphurous breath forming a horrific atmosphere. For Bowden telepathically thought, "Faster, faster! Murder them! They have wronged you. They deserve to die. Kill them. Torture them." Riggins and Damien were getting more electrified and tense, like rabid animals. They fed the girls ecstasy and tied belts around their necks to make it easier to stab Jennifer and Sarah. They offered them up as the ultimate sin against God. By selecting and stalking them, they believed that a virgin sacrifice of identical twins would earn them a ticket to hell. In an agitated frenzy, they strangled both girls and then doused their lifeless bodies with gasoline. Running from one room to another, they played Russian roulette with the Moretti brothers. Holding his gun in the center of the pillow, Riggins placed it against Luke's head and pulled the trigger. Nothing. Crying and trembling, they begged for mercy. None was given. William was the first to be shot in the head. No one survived. Envy's brain raced. "Finish it quickly. Don't let the police get you. Stop playing around." After 2 more clicks of the gun, Damien grabbed his claymore and chopped off Luke's head. The teenage murderers fled the scene, yelling profanities and laughing hysterically. The noise awoke the neighbor, who called the police. Joel stepped into the narrow and rutted alley behind the house to see what Damien and Riggins were up to when he felt a sharp pain in his leg. His bellowing shout flashed out in an instant, and in one quick word he beheaded a small spirit that had been clinging to him. It dissolved in a puff of blood-red vapors. Joel wished he could release his fighting power with full force, but he had his orders. Thus he had to deal with this cluster of angry spirits one by one. Another spirit clamped onto his back. He yelled, "Away with you! Go to a dry place!" Another demon landed on his back, then another on his leg, and if that wasn't enough, two more came with slashing words and nipping remarks. Growing tired of their game, with piercing words he vanquished them all to the dry places. A large, laughing spirit flew in close for a look at Joel and then shot straight into the sky. Why start a fight when he had already won his battle? At least Joel was free of demons. The demons were exhilarated by the murders, and at first continued to flock and circle about the house, but then they realized that they should return to Satan to receive their reward. Their numbers quickly dwindled, their cries faded, and soon they were nowhere to be seen. The first policeman to arrive at the scene stopped at the front gate. "Police," he assertively said. No response. Getting closer, he could see that the couch was already soaked black with blood. There was nothing anyone could do. Looking through the front window, he saw total chaos inside. The house had been ransacked. Waiting for backup to arrive, the first officer on the scene began to devise a plan on how best to enter the home. Upon the backup team's arrival, he drew his gun and yelled, "Police!" As the team entered the home, they stepped into the once quaint beach cottage, now a pitiful shamble. The furniture was thrown everywhere. The cushions on the sofa were slashed open. The coffee table had been chopped in several pieces and broken. Everything was out of place. In the middle of the floor were papers, books, small boxes, several items of clothing, and dead bodies. What type of animals would do this? A sickening feeling flooded the room. Someone had taken paint, or was it blood, and scrawled on the mirror. It was blood. It was fresh blood. Scrawled on the mirror was an obscene message of hate, a very clear message. They were young and beautiful, but dead, violently dead. The expression on their faces were blank, the eyes dry and staring. Each body was a crumbled mess. Their necks were broken and twisted into strange angles. A pool of blood had formed in front of their opened mouths. The spirits of these once cheerful and beautiful girls were gone. They were far, far away in heaven. The police would have to check every room in the house to determine the damage. They checked the whole house, upstairs and downstairs. There were terrible discoveries in each room. The investigation team felt concerned, nervous, and depressed. As they took a second look around, they tried to think of the criminal connections that might be involved. Why was the Moretti family a target for such a brutal attack? This was way more than your typical vengeance-seeking vandalism. The neighbor who called the police was questioned. "Christopher Moretti was such a nice young man," she said, her face full of grief and surprise. She gave a nervous chuckle as she shook her head. "He always said hello and smiled. We enjoyed having him as a neighbor. He was clean, responsible, and happy. Why would anyone want to hurt him?" The policeman wrote it all in his report. "Can you think of anyone who might have had some kind of grievance or grudge against the Morettis?" "No, I can't imagine anyone doing this." "Well, it's been quite an evening. We've had a real tragedy here. We have your statement. If you think of anything else, give us a call." With that, the officer handed her his card. Meanwhile, Riggins and Damien attempted to flee the scene using Christopher Moretti's sports car. They drove down the alley, panting, crying, terrified, and looking possessed. 3 cruel spirits rode on each of their backs, with their talons deeply rooted in fleshy tissue. The demons hissed and spit foul suggestions into their minds. The young men and their demons came to a corner and were about to turn left when they were spotted by police surveillance. Pursued by police, Riggins immediately opened fire. Assisted by his fiendish companions, Riggins quickly pinpointed his target. The first shot struck the forehead of the officer behind the wheel. The car careened into a neighbor's garage. As backup arrived, gunshots were fired. Spurred on by an immense number of demons, a battle ensued in which both of the fugitives were killed on sight. These guys were not like most criminals the police encountered. This was not a robbery gone wrong. This was out-and-out mayhem. Sergeant Scott shook his head. It always happens to the good people. The culprits appeared to be completely unprepared. They had no identifiable plan. They were improvising all the way. They even had to steal their getaway vehicle. Why? Murders like this didn't happen in Manhattan Beach. During the grim investigation, the policemen did not smell the odor of sulfur or see the red eyes staring at them from the ceiling. Nor did they hear the evil sneering, nor the sudden rush of black leathery wings as the demons soared away. A sea breeze fluttered around them. Details were crystal clear to Michael, but he felt oddly detached. From his vantage point, he could count 30 pairs of shifting red eyes staring at him. Time was moving on around him, yet he felt like he was in a bubble where time stood still. Joe just has to figure out why all this has happened. I hope he isn't foolish enough to blame God. Satan is and always has been man's adversary. You would think they'd have a clue from his name. After all, the word Satan means adversary. Michael looked into Nigel's eyes, so full of the white fire for battle, and yet so tender toward God's commands. Good friend, we all have compassion for Joe. We can only do as God commands. All this is in Joe's hands. It's up to him to find the answer. Nigel's thoughts flooded Michael's mind. May Joe's revelation come soon. Manuel started to quote God, but Nigel held him back. Bridle your word, Sword. Joe must go through this by himself. It is now time to test Joe's faith. It will be a real trying of his spirit.